Charles Lee is the founder and CEO of Ideation, a firm that helps brands scale their visions through strategic clarity and smart brand execution. He's the author of Good Idea, Now What? And the forthcoming Design Your Good Life, and has advised leaders in brands such as Toyota, Google, Caterpillar, Gibson Dunn, and Square Capital on innovation, brand strategy, and leadership. Drawing on 2 decades of executive practice, Charles focuses on bridging the gap between vision and action, helping organizations design brands and lives that are coherent, meaningful, and future ready in a rapidly evolving AI shaped landscape. Thank you so much for giving your time. Really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation.
Thanks so much
Um,
for having me, Andrew. I look forward to it.
so when someone asks you what you actually what you actually do as
Yeah.
an idea execution guy, how do you describe the work you're doing with leaders and brands right now?
Yeah, we focus in two primary areas. One's around strategic clarity. So that
Mhm.
has everything to do with decision making, problem solving, really thinking about, say, a business model or taking on a challenge that a executive is working through. And then once clarity is achieved, often our creative team, actually, our creative studio kicks in to help them figure out how to flesh that out, maybe for an internal pitch to their board or their executive committees, or actually manage the execution portion, whether working with other vendors or doing the work ourselves and actually rolling out an idea effectively.
Mm. When I sort of dug into your background a bit and looked at your book around Good Idea, Now What? It
Yeah.
reminds me of the quote that I love, which is technology is the answer. Now what's the question? And I
Mhm.
often think people come up with really great ideas, but
Yeah.
don't necessarily understand how to execute and importantly embed them. So how do how do you help people move from that great idea which they've had to
Yeah.
actually recognizing that maybe the idea needs to adapt, maybe the idea needs to
Mhm.
evolve, maybe the idea can be delivered, but how do people execute in real time?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think one is to really figure out, and we have various lenses through which you can deem whether or not a good idea is worth implementing. Because not
Mhm.
all even like good ideas
Yeah.
can be executed. You got to figure out, is it actually a desirable idea, whether within your organization or in the market?
Mhm.
Is it a feasible idea given the limitations of your resources, right? Um, is it, the right timing for that idea? And then, also like thinking about, is it a viable idea worth pursuing? So I think there is a process to think through, knowing fully that whatever idea you start with is rarely the idea you execute fully,
Mhm.
because you won't even know which questions to ask until you start going, really the practical, relevant questions to the concept. So I think it is a process, and we recognize that it's not just the idea. It's that happens in a vacuum. There's contextual realities of relationships. There may be political nuances within a business that prevents an idea. There may be lateral movement of leaders when an idea is starting to get executed that stalls the idea. So you can see why it's so hard. And the statistics kind of support this. I remember reading a study from Harvard Business Review a few years back, and it talked about over 90% of innovation projects don't really see the light of day. And it's because all of these like variables that are part of an idea, in addition to the idea itself.
Mhm. One of the things I found when we were talking before we hit record about being a consultant was that you'd often go into a business, and I'm not sure it's the same for you, and the business would have all the right ideas and the right people and the right talent, but you just needed that structure, guidance,
Mm.
almost prodding from an external party to do it. And is that part of what
Yeah,
you find, that it's not that businesses necessarily lack the skills, but it's perhaps they don't
correct.
have the right strategy, frameworks, guidance in these particular areas?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, specific vertical knowledge or subject matter expertise is helpful.
Yeah.
But really, what people need is they need, because most people feel like, most leaders, like they don't have the bandwidth or the mental space to think about it more intentionally or strategically, given all of the day to day responsibilities. And I think having an external thought partner come in,
Mm.
whether consultant, coach, advisor, really helps to maybe identify what is obvious But in the midst of all of the energy and all of the responsibilities surrounding one's work, it's sometimes difficult to see. And sometimes they just need an external validator that
Mm.
will kind of, you know, pressure cook the concepts and give them some like honest feedback or new insights from maybe even other fields. And I think that's the beauty of having a thought partner, a consultant advisor for a leader.
Mm. Do you ever find that sometimes you're brought in and perhaps there's more, what's the right word? There's more conflict than you expect, not towards you, but almost within. I used to find you go in there and think, we're actually here to help you solve your internal issues, not to solve this problem. Do you find that sometimes? You should charge
Absolutely.
double for that, by the
Yeah,
way.
absolutely. Because I'm always thinking in terms of it's not just the, the new innovative idea they want or a challenge they want to solve for. I'm always interested to see like what led to that need.
Mhm.
What's kind of the unspoken things that are causing that um, the need to bring an idea to life, and it's often related to something's happening in the business. I know, if you think about most businesses, they're either trying to increase profit, lower costs, or mitigate risk. And because of that, I think there are these internal pressures. But like to your point, sometimes it may literally be just unspoken. Like I could see it sometimes in the body language between leaders in the room,
Yeah.
and when you start to hear their logic behind why they want to do it or why they don't want to do it, you can kind of see that there's a relational context to kind of explore. So it often ends up being much deeper than whatever it is that they hired you for. And
Mm.
to your point, it often leads to conversations about culture and leadership, and really working through all the various differing perspectives around what ought to be done.
Mm. Yeah, it's ringing many bells. The I mean, one thing obviously that wasn't around when I was consulting, which I think is good and bad in different ways, is AI, and at least in the
Mhm.
way we recognize it today, anyway. So we recognize AI can generate decks, it can create copy, it can create
Mhm.
concepts in some ways. I wonder what your view is on the role of AI and AI human interaction at work.
Yeah, I think that is the question of our time. And when I think about it, is as much as AI continues to advance, there are certain characteristics of our human agency that remain true regardless. So one is that there's a level of
Oh, I can't hear
creativity
you. You seem to have
that we
frozen.
have. Um,
Mm,
did I lose?
mm.
Oh, something happened.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it sort of stopped just as I asked the question. So I got the question
Okay.
out, and you said yes, and then so if
Okay.
you want to start from there, that'd be great. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Um, I think that's an excellent question. I think the reality is right now, as AI continues to exponentially accelerate, there's something I think we have to guard intently, and that's our human agency. There are
Mhm.
things that AI for sure cannot do in the way that human beings can, and I'll give you a couple of examples. There was a professor at the University of South Australia who did an interesting study around creativity, and then he basically created a scale from 0 to 1, one being some of the most creative, artistic, insightful, innovative types of skill sets and nuances of people who are just kind of at the top of their game.
Mhm.
And then he began to see all of the data points in the work that AI was producing right now. And he said, really, AI is maybe at a 0.25 out of the 1 scale. And that right now, most like creative work being produced by AI is maybe at an amateur level. This is why people, I think, can see whether it's AI or whether it's being produced by a human being. You can kind of tell we intuitively have become professional viewers of creative work,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
We may not be creative, but we can
Mhm.
kind of see that. And so, like, I think human creativity is still something that I think like creative people don't have to worry about because that's not an area yet. Maybe it'll get there, but I think part of human creativity is our critical thinking skills,
Mm.
our ability to really have intuition sometimes that seems to be something that machines are not at that place yet. They can learn based on the data set you give them, but from large models. But the ability for a human being to critically think about a problem, reflect on it, tap into their experience, sometimes their leadership intuition, those are factors that are uniquely human. And on top of that, most ideas, like we just discussed, require other human beings. So to
Mm.
have the emotional intelligence or the social intelligence to be able to interact with team members is something uniquely human. And on top of that, just providing moral guidance for business or individually. And that type of autonomy is a very unique human type of experience. And so I'm in the camp like I want to embrace the tools, and AI is a tool. It's not the goal. Since it's a tool, it has to, they have this thing called adaptive intelligence, right?
Mm.
This idea of like taking in all of these experiences, but adding wisdom and insights and evaluation and critical thinking to what you're reacting to. I think human beings can do that for machines, right? And so I feel like we have a set of attributes that really human beings are the best in this universe, or at least this world, in being able to actually act upon.
Yeah, and I'm reassured that you said that because, and I was saying before, a lot of people I've talked to, a lot of business leaders, CEOs, and teams. There's almost seems to be this slight panic in a way. We've got to get AI. We've got to bring AI in. I think without really knowing what they actually mean when they're saying that. So I think what like you said, ultimately,
Yeah.
businesses are typically trying to gain market share, grow profitability,
Yep.
increase revenue, etc. And then it's, I guess, if AI can help you do that, as opposed to AI almost being the answer without really knowing what they're trying to ask. And do you find you're having to navigate the tension between a business that wants to bring on board AI and trying to explain to them gently, well, what is it you're actually trying to do? And the answer can't just be bring in AI. The answer must, do you find that a conversation you're having more and more?
Yeah, I think that's part of the conversation is to effectively implement it. You're going to need people.
Mm,
For example, globally, I think 56% of workers have not been trained in the technologies that have been implemented in AI. So
yeah.
they feel like inadequate. They're not trained. But also, it's not I think a displacement. Although it's true that I think the last time I saw is AI may lead to over 90 million of displaced jobs around
Hmm.
the world by 2030, but it'll also create another 170 million. So there is a net gain to be gained from AI over time. Maybe not immediately. I think people will feel the sense. I mean, I speak with like university students that are graduating and they're stressed because there's not enough employment for entry level positions. So I think that's going to be a short term reality. But
Mm,
as AI continues to be integrated into business, we're going to need human beings to really oversee it, leverage it. And to your point, it's really a tool. So I remind leaders that look, AI is a means by which you actually get business done, but business is still very human. It
mm,
requires human beings that you need to trust with, that have the business acumen, that can work with other team members. But now you're leading teams of people, teams of AI agents, and teams of robots, depending on the industry that you're in. So it does add multiple layers, but it doesn't remove the need for actual human beings to lead a business.
yeah. No, 100%. And I think there's a couple of issues that are going on around that. I think one is that as business leaders don't fully communicate what AI has been brought in to do and to support people. I think there was a report recently that said 25% of people are trying to sabotage AI within businesses because they
Mm,
fear, well, why would I try and promote this thing that's going to steal my job, which is not necessarily what's going to happen at all.
yep.
The other issue is with a lot of big businesses seeing AI as platforms they need to invest heavily into in the same way they invested into SAP or Oracle or Salesforce or
Mhm.
whatever. A lot of people naturally are bringing their own AI tools to work. They're
Yeah.
creating their own agents. They're using OpenClaw. They're using lots of different things that actually, as a business as a business leader, as part of the IT security team, are terrifying because a lot of people don't necessarily realize that You put this onto your laptop, it's accessing all of your corporate data, it's
Yeah.
accessing everything. And I think
Yeah.
there's perhaps a lack of clarity around the two things. One is the importance of communicating what you're doing with bringing AI into the business,
Mm,
and secondly, how crucial it is that AI operates within a framework, operates within some guidelines, etc.
correct. Yeah, I think that's a challenge. I think
Mm,
security, privacy. I know one of the big aspects that we try to encourage in our clients is your employees need to feel like there's safety in using the technology, learning it. That you are focused on creating some guidelines and transparency and accountability around the use of AI.
mhm,
Because you're right, the use of AI, while it has risen in 2025, I think it was something like 13% or so, and
mm.
but the actual trust or distrust has risen as well.
Yeah,
The percentages, I think it was something like 18%
yeah,
last time I checked. So I think leaders have to see that it's not just about like launching it because it speeds up business and it's a velocity tool,
mm,
but you got to bring your team along. And I think this is why I think larger brands as well, like Microsoft just allocated 4 billion to train
mhm,
a lot of its employees on the tech. And I think
mm.
that's smart because people realize ultimately, once again, like people are leading the company.
Yeah. And I think there's also the need as AI hopefully takes away some of the monotonous tasks. So hopefully lessons are
Mhm.
are having to wade through 200 emails a day, all that sort of thing. So that creates some additional time for the employee. I do think there's a need as well to train or guide people what to do with that additional time.
Yeah.
It's not about we'll just do more work because that seems to be it's counterintuitive. But how do we help people perhaps use some of the creativity they have to just use that extra 10, 12 hours a week they're suddenly gaining. So I don't hear much talked about in that. Talk about how to train with the AI, but not how to train to use the time you're saving.
Yeah, I think this is an amazing opportunity as AI takes over tasks.
Mm,
Leaders will have a little bit more of time and mental space to
mhm,
really move from being like oracles and information holders because anyone can look up anything a leader is saying,
mm,
right? And fact check them pretty quickly. But it gives you an opportunity to really mentor your direct reports, help them grow in all these other human skills that allows them to more even effectively use the tools
mm,
in light of those skills. And so I think it is a wonderful opportunity for companies to upskill, invest in people that they've always talked about investing in. And
mm.
it gives you actual time. It creates people have said for years, like, I wish I had more time to
Yeah.
invest in my team. Well, here's your chance if you can use the tools well. Uh,
Mm,
and so I think I'm excited to see what that produces.
mhm.
While part of me is super cautious about what these tools might, what kind of damage they may create, the other part of me is like, yeah, I'm optimistic because maybe this is a great opportunity for us to lead better,
Yeah.
fellow team members better.
It's really interesting what you said then. I never really thought about it before. One of the things we've always says you can't one thing you can't make is more time.
Yeah.
But actually, in a very concrete way, hopefully with AI, we
Yeah.
literally are manufacturing time, which is something you can't buy time, you can't make it, you can't create it, you
Mhm.
can't extend the day or whatever. But if you're suddenly finding that actually, gosh, I don't have to do that report that took me 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon to do. I don't have to do that report that took me 2 hours on a Monday morning. Yeah, that's suddenly 5, 10,
Yeah.
12 hours a week I'm gaining, which is massive, really.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's
What
very
one
cool.
of the things that's changed a lot since I first entered the workplace, I guess, is the volume of data, number of dashboards, number of
Mhm.
reports, number of insights supposedly that generated, and which I guess is a good thing. But I sometimes wonder when I used to get a report on a Monday morning and tell me what sales were, what profit was, what costs were. That was it. I could run the week and then get carry on
Yeah.
crack on with the team really. Whereas now it sometimes feels there's almost analysis paralysis, or just, and I wondered how
Yeah.
you guide businesses, how you yourself understand what clarity looks like in a world where we do have
Mhm.
so much information about things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely not a time where we're lacking data.
No.
Right? I think it's more important. And I learned this years ago
Mhm.
from someone who works with large data sets. This is probably, I want to say like 7, 8 years ago, and he's worked with the World Bank and such. And he gave me really good advice. He's like, Charles, you want to encourage your clients to think about what data they actually need. I think since it's so easy to pull as much data into a pool or a set, thinking that you might need all these elements, but he was also in the camp that said, look, you're also responsible for the data you're collecting, and it increase your liability exponentially if you just are there collecting all kinds of customer data and such, because you got to protect all of that too.
Yeah.
And so it allowed me to really think about, like, what do I really need to connect for the work I'm doing? And it forces me to think about what is it that I ultimately want to accomplish. And you
Hmm.
kind of see this in like form fill outs from customers, and whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit business, is we're collecting so much information that you but a lot of organizations don't use that information, and it just creates this wealth of liability. And because it's we're bound to be attacked by hackers or attempted to be by hackers. That's just reality of this world. And so for me, it's just like, don't feel overwhelmed. I mean, you got to think about security, but really try to leverage the data that helps you achieve the goals and the objectives that you are pursuing. Start
Hmm.
there and then incrementally add things versus just asking your team for everything that's out there. That won't necessarily help you make more clear decisions.
No, it's very very interesting. I work for I'm trying to think, a couple of companies I work for. They're almost their success metric was the collection of data.
Mhm.
So right, we've got this huge, not this, but a sort of version of a spreadsheet with like a million columns, 10 million rows, whatever. Let's see if we can populate every single cell, then that's been a success. And you think, well, why don't you just try to sell more stuff? It was which of those data metrics
Yeah.
is it? Customer satisfaction? Is it retention rate? What it cost of acquisition? What are the key things you think are actually going to
Yeah.
help you sell more stuff, as opposed to some of the metrics? Yeah, just metaphorically gather dust because they're never ever looked at. They're never ever needed.
Mhm.
But it takes time, it takes resource, it takes data
Absolutely.
capacity, etc., to actually just maintain that data.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I fully agree. If you can figure out, all right, tell me what you want to know, and here are the sort of 5 data points you need to understand that. Oh, okay. Well, here are the 3 data points then.
Yeah.
Because, like I say, there's no lack of data, but data doesn't necessarily equate to knowledge, and
Mhm.
that's the gap, I guess. Is what do we do with the data once we've got it?
Correct. Yeah. You could collect, trillions of data points, but you want to know why you're collecting it and what you're using it for. And that seems pretty common sense.
Hmm. Hmm.
But there's this like just in case mentality. And I think
Yes.
it's just like, well, maybe I'll need it one day. But
Yeah.
like to your point, it may cost you more to keep it and clean it and leverage it than it is to actually focus and collect the type of data that will truly make business impact in what you're doing.
Hmm. I think a lot of people you work with and people that I worked with in the past, they often talk about they want transformation, they want innovation, they want to sort of change everything, but they
Mhm.
sort of pull back almost by default to sort of short-term metrics, so
Mhm.
quarterly reports, analyst reports, stock price, etc. And I wonder how you navigate the tension between a desire to grow long term and then that immediate sort of short-term performance pressure that sits with the CEO.
Yeah. Let me preface it by saying is I understand the pressure of stakeholders and those
Mhm.
who need short-term gains.
Yeah.
So, depending on the size of the business, it's one thing for a small business, is another thing for a public company.
Mhm.
And so that pressure to really perform next quarter is real. So I don't want to, I understand that leaders have a difficult task if you're leading a public company, for example, to answer to all of your stakeholders. But transformation at its core is a long term process and a long term outcome. And it requires a long period of time with several maybe short term wins. But I remind them that, look, you can't change a culture of a company overnight. In fact, depends on the scale of the business. I remember Eric Schmidt from Google talking in a panel about like, yeah, I wish we could keep our culture consistent in every office, but he's like, that's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
So they're learning how to contextualize the Google culture in Singapore versus, Palo Alto,
Mm.
or, so I think they're trying to, like, at a large scale do that. So I think transformation is fun to talk about, but really difficult to implement because you need both short term goals that feed into a larger plan. And so I think this is done through effective, like, planning, communication, based on where you are in kind of that innovation curve that we've
Mm.
probably seen online. And then, leading teams effectively. Like sometimes if you're a leader of a department, your department needs, more motivation than information. They need more communication sometimes than motivation. Sometimes they need more tools and resources and training than they need actual, like, motivation. And
Mm.
other times they don't need more information. They just want you to remind them of where you're taking them. And so I feel like transformation is a long-term process that I regularly remind leaders. You can have short-term wins, but you can't overlook the short-term wins if it doesn't add to the long-term goals.
Mm. This is probably, I mean, a very difficult question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. When a lot of time, it tends to be, rephrase it. It's rarely the big incumbent, huge corporates that develop the amazing
Mhm.
next big technology. So I'm thinking, Anthropic didn't exist a few years ago. OpenAI
Yeah.
didn't exist a few years ago. Nvidia was relatively small in the chip manufacturing space, etc. That, and you think there's massive companies out there that really could have owned this space. But do you
Mhm.
think, is that just a cultural issue that big companies, once you have 100,000, 200,000, million employees, they can't be that innovative, dynamic, quick moving business as well as being the big corporate?
Yeah, it's very hard and difficult to create enough velocity to be that innovative that quickly.
Hmm.
Because as you grow, you're bound to put in policies and regulations that protect the business, and rightly so.
Yeah, yeah.
You're a lot more prone to attacks, lawsuits, and
Mm.
there's a lot of internal things to work through. So I think by nature of the machine, if you will, it's much easier for a smaller startup to make decisions, and probably they too aren't fully protected in what they're doing, but they do it anyway
Yeah.
because there's a limited amount of decision makers versus going up the food chain in a large business. So I
Mm.
think by nature, but I think what larger companies have been doing over the past decade a lot more effectively is thinking in terms of, like, how does innovation happen? Does it happen through maybe investing or incubating companies that are not part of our brand and negotiating, IP share,
Mhm.
or negotiating some type of funding opportunity where we get a percentage of the business in exchange for more technology and resources that come from the large business.
Mm.
Or they're literally just kind of taking the acquisition approach when they see potential competitors in a specific vertical of their business percolating. They'll go out and reach them and give them what they would feel like it is an irresistible deal, and
Yeah.
that just kind of speeds up innovation. So I know a lot of large businesses have kind of, like, if you will, scouts that in different, hot cities that are developing new technology, to keep an eye out on what may be a value add to their business that lead
Mm.
to partnerships and acquisitions and such. So I feel like that's how, like, larger companies do it. I
Mm.
did hear years ago, I was talking to, at the time, he was a lead of innovation at GE, General
Mhm.
Electric. And what they started to do was actually hire founders to coach their executives, because for them back then, it would take a 12 to 18-month period to change, like, the design of a knob of a washer.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
And so they started hiring to start changing mindsets, to create more of an agile approach, or do quicker sprints on concepts, and really hired well-to-do entrepreneurs to help
Mm.
coach their executives. And so I think companies are trying, but they're dealing with the reality that most small businesses don't have to deal with. And I
Yeah.
think that's the reason why innovation will probably often happen more
Mhm.
outside.
Mm.
But some of the large brands are getting really smart about how to acquire these ideas.
Yeah, whatever you think about them as companies and businesses, I look at what Microsoft did with investing heavily in OpenAI. Look at what Google did with their investment strategy and things. And that, Microsoft's been around. It's been around for a few years now. In terms of a modern tech company, it's pretty elder statesman really. But actually, it's done some pretty amazing things with its. Yeah, like you say, it hasn't necessarily decided we've got to build this ourselves. It's recognised we can buy and invest in other companies. We can use their software. We can use their platform, their guidance. They can use our platform. So I do think there are companies out there that are doing it, particularly within a tech space, I guess, because that's the way they started.
Mhm.
It tends to be because because you look at the sort of 10 biggest companies in the world from 10 years ago, 20 years ago,
Mhm.
30 years ago. It's a fascinating exercise.
Yeah.
They're, and I guess that's just almost natural selection, really, in a way.
Yeah.
New companies come along, they grow. Next stage with somebody else, and they grow, and it's really interesting how it
Yeah.
evolves. I think.
Yeah.
When you work with business leaders and CEOs and their view of things, how do you, or how does their inner life, their approach to work, etc., how does that influence the shape of the brand they're developing?
One, that's an amazing question. I think this, and I feel like a little theme arising in our conversation is, um, at the end of the day, every human being, what's happening on the inside eventually comes out.
Yeah.
It's really hard to suppress feelings and emotions if you're going through something in life or you're thinking about something. It's
Mhm.
bound to come out in your conversations, your behavior, and your actions. So
Yeah.
I think what's happening in the inner life of a leader is vitally important. And in a lot of my work, although it starts on the business side of things and advising and consulting, it's bound to hit conversations around their what they're working on personally, and it turns a little bit more slightly more coaching, and having an outside thought partner just think about you know how does their work impact their sense of fulfillment and purpose. Does it align with their values? Because often those are the really core inner points that create some of the conflict and the challenges. Maybe
Mm.
something a leader is doing doesn't align with their true north, their sense of purpose, or their values. They're conflicted because their values don't match the values of what they're leading. And so it's bound to come up. And I think doing the hard work as a leader about just being more self aware internally is really a big part of ultimately their work.
Mm.
And so for me, as much as people try to compartmentalize various aspects of their life, and I think not always, but men try this with far more attempt sometimes than women, just generally speaking,
Yeah.
is like I think our brains are wired in such a way that we can compartmentalize things a little bit more naturally. I think this is why women make great leaders because they can connect all the dots, and they're
Yeah.
connecting dots all the time. Generally, not every woman, but I. So I feel like the inner life is bound to come up. So I don't know of an engagement I had where it doesn't ultimately lead to conversations about who they are and what they desire to pursue personally.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think we've almost come full circle. So I think when we had the time of Rockefellers and Henry T. Ford and people like that, they were very much they were the brand in essence. And
Mhm.
now we have the likes of Sam Altman, we have from
Yeah.
OpenAI, we have Dario from Anthropic, we obviously have Elon Musk, etc.
Yeah.
The people themselves, people watch out for their posts, for their letters, for their musings, for their reports, whatever, and almost the brand very much, yeah, it's quite dangerous in a way.
Yeah.
Lives with the individual, and we've seen sort of share
Yeah.
price of various companies shoot up, shoot down based on what the CEO, leader, owner, developer sort of says. So it does feel that we're coming back to almost that, not necessarily personality led business, but businesses where the person, that figurehead,
Yeah.
is perhaps more important than it was, 10 years ago from some of the big companies that existed then.
Yeah. I think it's challenging times because um, I feel like, the cult of personality
Mm.
is real. and it
Mm,
sways the market, and you accelerate that with digital means to actually do that and propagate a belief that you want public perception to be. So I think because that fuels into egos, that fuels into often a circle that all say yes, whether it's a board or not. And I see some of this signs of this definitely in like Elon's board, for example. And I think it's not always healthy. I think it can be very toxic and enabling of sometimes not great behavior.
mm,
And so I do I think it is shifting back because personal brands are so powerful publicly now. But I do wonder if, as a business, especially those who are part of boards, have a fiduciary responsibility to really take care of the business. And that line's being blurred. So
yeah.
I don't know if it's a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing at some level of moving forward on ideas, but I feel like the downside is huge. So
Mm,
I am concerned that these seven, or actually technically eight, that run the seven
mhm,
biggest tech companies in the world, these eight billionaires
yeah.
have have really tipped the scale on their power, and I think that could lead to a lot of cautionary tales. I tell people it's really difficult. And so, yeah, I don't know what to fully make of it. And I think I'm kind of processing it as you are. But really, I think it's an interesting time we live in that couldn't have existed prior to the internet.
No, and I think we see it as well in obviously political life, where you have either Putin or Trump or
Yeah,
Zelensky or whoever. It very much is a very similar way in that it's rather than having a view, well, it's been a collective decision, it's been rationalised, it's been talked about in cabinet, in board, etc., etc. You still get a feeling it's been just been decided at 2 a.m. in the morning, and here's what we're doing. It's
yeah,
that's a lot of, and this is very same sort of thing with big business, I guess, especially when you're the founder and then become the CEO. Because a founder typically isn't necessarily a natural CEO.
correct.
I've met some wonderful CEOs, and they haven't ever been people that have founded companies. I met some wonderful founders,
Yep.
and if they go off and become chief design officer, chief creative officer, whatever, they're fabulous. But it's just because being a CEO in lots of ways is a pretty thankless task, really.
Hmm.
You're dealing with analysts and people complaining, you're dealing with the market, you're having to sort of try and raise finance,
Correct.
all that stuff, not inventing the latest, coolest, greatest thing.
Yeah.
So it's there is a big difference. And when you end up having CEO and chairman being the same person, yeah, not quite sure that that's a very good. So
I agree.
you're marking your own homework, which is
Yeah.
never a good thing, really.
Yeah. I think I'm in that camp with you.
Hmm. So from your perspective, what do you think perhaps is the most underused, or the question that isn't asked enough when people are thinking about AI, their brand, and the people that they work with, but also the people that are their clients?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the question I share with leaders is what is your human plus AI strategy?
Mm.
And it
Mhm.
just kind of nudges them to think about, what do you mean a human strategy? And for me, that's a question. I think it's an important question. And as we've
Yeah.
discussed during this
Mhm.
podcast, that's an area that I think leaders are gladly. I'm glad they're thinking more about lately. And it's not just tech. It's not a tech transformation. It's a human workforce, workplace, plus technology transformation. And seeing it more holistically, I think will yield better outcomes. In the long.
Mm. How do you find the experience of well, assume you sitting down and writing a book compared to being in the trenches working with people day to day? Are
Yeah,
you a very natural writer? Is it something you've got to be very disciplined with? What is it like, the experience?
yeah. I've always loved writing,
Hmm.
so it's not a it's a grind, but not unenjoyable. I mean, there are times, obviously, but for me, what I found is that my writing is kind of a this reciprocal process where I learn from so many great leaders. I
Hmm.
get to ask them, questions and get first-hand insights into how they think about things, and it allows me an opportunity to sit down and write. What is it that I'm observing? What is it that I'm hearing? What frameworks are actually working? What are some challenges of commonly held frameworks? So I'm constantly assessing that. And so writing is a good medium through which I could really flesh out. And I realize the more I can write, the better I am in articulating a view, the better
Mm.
I am in really on my feet thinking about a problem. So for me, writing is relatively natural, and it's an area that I just kind of enjoy building upon.
Mm. And how did you find writing the latest book? So, Design Your Good Life, and what do people expect when they get the book?
Yeah, what I saw kind of just across the board is I think life is very cyclical, and we all find ourselves in certain seasons where we feel like we've just kind of gone with the flow and adrift from where
Mm.
we think we ought to go or what we value as individuals.
Mhm.
And so I wrote the book Design Your Good Life, and it's not trying to define what a good life is for a person. And I think that's informed by our backgrounds, our culture, our view of reality, and how we justify what's happening in our lives. There's so many different factors, maybe a religious perspective,
Mhm.
a sense of spirituality. So these are all factors. I'm not trying to define what that is, but I'm trying to provide a framework that feels relatively universal, that if you're in a particular phase of life, and the book's broken down to three key phases. The first is called Spark. And in each phase, there's a particular mindset to develop. And, I put a lot of research behind it. And I'll give you some examples. A particular skill set to develop, a drive to pursue in that phase, and
Mhm.
an outcome to pursue. So, for example, the first phase is called Spark, and is designed for people who feel like something's on the horizon. They're not quite sure where, or they're in the middle of transition. They're not really sure what to do. And so the mindset in that is curiosity. And there's so many fascinating studies around the brain and curiosity, and really not only the mental health benefits, but the physical benefits out of being living a curious life. And most of us end up plateauing in curiosity, or even companies encourage curiosity during the application process. And statistically, by month 6, most people's curiosity kind of dive because they realize that's not being rewarded or incentivized. So people start aligning to the culture of the company or organization. So it kind of walks through like curiosity, and then how do you connect the ideas that are percolating out of curiosity? How do you drive it towards strategic clarity so that the outcome in that first phase is really about, um, you know, some sense of passion, purpose. It may not be perfect, but you have a directional purpose at least. And the
Mm.
second layer is all about actualizing that sense of purpose you have through all these various ways you can really develop proof around whatever idea you want to pursue, and moving from just the proof of concept to actually creating proof of value behind what you're working on. And that should lead to a sense of having confidence whenever you enter a room,
Mhm.
to be able to say the outcome of confidence is like, I could go into any conversation and have a clear sense of the value I'm bringing to the table. And people who can live like that are able to experience success at a different level because they know why they're there. And it's not that they're not insecure at some level, but they have confidence that they've done the work. They have a proof of value, not just a proof of concept, a proof of value of what they're bringing to the table. And I'm really excited about the third phase, which is called influence, and that's all about creating a mindset of contribution for the world. And what I've seen commonly throughout kind of my studies around what people deem a good life, there's a commonality that I think people generally want to do good in the world. And I think that's all about like, how do you curate your resources, whether financial, your relationships, your ideas, and leverage that to create the type of impact that doesn't just benefit you, but benefit
Mm.
those you love, your community, and maybe parts of the world, so that the outcome of that is actually legacy. And so the book moves a little bit more deeper than my first book, which is all
Mhm.
about idea execution. This is kind of bringing it together, not just for your professional lives, but even
Mm.
a personal life. If you want to develop a better relationship with your teenage daughter, I think it still starts with curiosity, being curious about her life, not trying to mandate the outcome you want, but staying curious and then connecting the dots for opportunity. So you could kind of see the framework works regardless of a professional or a personal outcome desire. And so I felt like there weren't too many books, especially that talked about legacy and influence in the way
Mm.
that I wrote. So I thought it'd be a value add because life is so short and it's very cyclical. You're going to end up in the spark phase multiple times in life. So I just wanted to, I'm not trying to be a guru. I just wanted to provide a practical framework through which you can kind of navigate whatever point you are in that season.
No, I think that's a wonderful description, and it's very interesting. So I've got a teenage daughter, but
Mhm.
not 19, so I'm still a teenager, I guess, officially.
Barely.
But and when he talks about curious, it reminds me of that Walt Whitman quote: "Be curious, not judgmental." And I think that was very much where we are in our relationship now. Is
Mm,
about me being curious about what she's doing, thinking, believing, and yes,
yeah,
of course, I'm going to have different opinions, but sometimes you've got to keep them to yourself. Sometimes you got to listen and just take
absolutely.
it on board, really. But I think so. My daughter's studying philosophy at university. She just philosophy and ethics. She just started.
That's what I did in grad school.
Oh,
So
fabulous!
I love it.
And I'm doing a PhD in philosophy at the
Wonderful.
moment, and it's no, and I think yeah, because she was saying, no, should I do this? It feels like it doesn't feel very focused on one particular career, and I said, well, that's the
Mhm.
wonderful thing about it. It's
Yeah.
I think what philosophy does, hopefully, is help you understand how to learn and to
Mhm.
recognize some of the amazing things that have been experienced by other people. So I do think we'll find more and more value, I think, for humanities degrees, undergrad courses as we go forward, because in the UK, I'm sure in the US, there's been a big push towards maths and physics and science and
Mhm.
programming, and which is fabulous. But we have so many people coming out of university now with a great maths degree.
Yeah.
The field is so competitive, actually, coming
Yeah.
out of there with a well, how do you think? Here's how I think, and
Yeah.
that's going to be a valuable skill. So no, and I like the fact the book is dual purpose, that it's both life focused and business focused,
Yeah.
which I think is a good thing. Because yeah, people don't leave university, start a job, and then retire from that job in 40 years' time anymore.
Yeah.
You might have 5, 6, 7, 10 different jobs and 5 different careers during that time. So actually,
Correct.
going back to that spark phase is going to be so important in the future, really.
Yeah.
So and it's a personal question, so you don't have to answer it. But what does a good life look like and mean for you?
Yeah. I think for me, I actually gave some hints about this in my first book years ago.
Mhm.
And in that book, I end with two main questions. One is, at the end of the day, what matters most to you? And then secondly, what's enough? So for me, a good life is a sense that, look, I am doing something that is meaningful in my life, and I'm able to invest in that every day, whatever that is. So for me, I love helping people execute on their ideas. That's more of a personal mission for me that birthed the company versus the other way around. So when I find opportunities to help somebody else get from point A to point A1, I feel very fulfilled. So I love doing podcasts and writing articles and such because I feel like people want to live out whatever their dreams are.
Mm.
For me personally, also, my wife and I are heavily involved in trying to do more cause related work. And that's always been a passion of ours.
Mm.
So I feel like a good life is us working hard to generate the type of resources. But we've both committed that we're not going to live a lifestyle that would be parallel to our salaries. We wanted to make sure that we have enough to put in our family foundation to contribute to causes that are meaningful because we think that's a better life than buying another car, buying one more thing to play around with. And so for us, that's like good is not just good for ourselves, but really good for the world. It's moving in the third phase of the book. I forget where I picked up this phrase, but it's the idea of being best in the world in something to be the best for the world in something. And that shift is what defines good for me personally. And then, we want to think like at the end of the day, what matters most. And I feel like it's our relationships. It's, if I have friends I hang out with, and that's such a lost uh, lost in many, if you look at the statistics of older men not having friends.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's all good. Like I could care less about my title, who I work with. I love them, but that's not what makes me me. Good is being, to be able to live out what I sense my purpose is in the world. And to do what people I love is just a phenomenal gift. And if I have that and some level of health, I mean, I don't need anything else. And if I could help others along the way, even better.
That's a wonderful answer. Thank you. That's really, really, really good. So is that where you, or how you maintain your high levels of energy and purposefully? It's
Yeah.
energy from being around other people.
Yeah. Uh, I think I'm half introvert, half extrovert. So
Mhm.
it kind of depends. It
Yeah.
can be draining socially sometimes.
Yes.
Uh, but yeah, I love it. I feel like, um, older I get, I'll be 54 this year. So the older I get, I'm like, life's so short. Things go by so quick. We just became empty nesters this past year, and both our kids are out of the home, and I realized, man, who would have thought it would have happened already? And given that, to your point, you can't, like, time is limited, and the older I get, I just want to not only enjoy but do good in the world, and I feel like that's what brings a sense of meaning, not all this other stuff that I think I was taught to pursue in my 20s, you know,
Mm.
or
Yeah.
influenced by our culture to pursue. And but the happiest people I know, the most fulfilled people I know, the sense of like joy people I know are people who kind of live like this. They And I've tried hard to intentionally build this over decades. So it didn't happen overnight, but it
Mhm.
took intentional planning when we first got married, and it
Mm.
wasn't perfect, but we learned along the way. And I feel incredibly blessed to do what I do and to help who I get to help. And that's for me, that's a pretty good life. And that's what a lot of young entrepreneurs, when they were when I before I wrote the book, one of the reasons I wrote the book is because all these like young entrepreneurs and business people, probably in their 20s and 30s, were asking like, how'd you build your life? And I always tell them, like, it probably sounds better than it is, but it's probably not as bad as I think it is sometimes,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, somewhere in between. And because they're like, it seems like you love what you do, you have a great relationship with your kids, those who have been close to our family, you have a great relationship with your spouse, you're trying to contribute good to the world. Like, how did that happen? So that caused me to kind of be reflective,
Mm.
because some of it was intentional, but some of it's accidental. So the book is just an observation of how my life was shaped,
Mhm.
beyond external factors, beyond my control, but also some intentional things I've done internally to kind of build this kind of life. So
Mm.
I'm not asking people to build a life like me, but I'm just saying, hey, this is a framework that's really helping me understand how I got to where I am. And I think it could be universally helpful for others to get to where they want to go.
Absolutely. So I think, yeah, 100%. I think a lot of time life happens to us
Mhm.
as opposed to, yeah, us being part of actually forming what it means. And I think I came to a similar realization to you later than I should have done. But yeah, absolutely, it's certainly not about, for me, anymore, about having more.
Yeah.
We've got a nice house, we've got a nice couple of cars. They're not the newest cars in the world. They don't need to be. Our phones are a couple of years out of date now, but actually, that's okay. Really, it's not.
Yeah.
Yes, once you get past that sort of comparison culture, I think things feel very, very different about what's. And I'm similar to you. So my son's 16, so another couple of years we'll be in a similar situation. So empty
Yeah.
nesters, which is kind of exciting and kind of scary. So we need to plan and actually think what that means, rather than just suddenly look at each other and say,
Absolutely.
"Oh,
Yeah.
you're here, are you? Oh,
Yeah.
where are the kids? Oh gosh, they're gone,"
Yeah.
and rattle around this house. So yeah. So what do you expect to happen with the business in the next few years?
Fortunately, we have some of the most loyal clients that we could have ever asked for.
Mhm.
And so I think our business, one word, we're very fortunate. I understand this is fortunate, incredibly steady. Our team does great work. And just by word of mouth, we'll be 17 years as a company officially this year.
That's great.
It's been all word of mouth for 17 years, which has
Wow.
been amazing experience. And
Must have been doing something right.
yeah, I don't know. Like, maybe that's a different book, but we thrive through COVID. We're very fortunate to be able to work across the world, and so I think the business will be in a good place. I do want to write more. I think I'm
Mhm.
re-engaging. speaking a lot more. When my first book came out, I was speaking quite extensively, and those are some of the early years of our business. So, and I just want to contribute to help others along their journey. I'm not trying to, I mean, of course, my publisher would love to sell the book more, but my goal is like if I can help somebody else, maybe kind of refocus or reset or renew their passions, I think that's a win. So that's kind of my target for the next season is I want to write more books that help people along their own journey so they could experience the type of good life they want.
And my final question, you've been very generous with your time, and it's a little bit of a selfish one. So as I said, having a 16-year-old son and a 19-year-old daughter, they're obviously looking at AI, they're nervous, they're reading the headlines, this, oh my, what should I be doing? What would you suggest to young people coming out of university? Where should they expend their energy and put their attention?
Yeah, I think on I'll answer it at two levels.
Mhm.
Maybe specifically around AI. I think they ought to embrace the tech, even if there are many university students I interact with are concerned about it.
Yeah.
So I get that. I totally agree that we should be cautious, but you don't want to be left behind in that it's just a new reality that you
Mhm.
should learn. And the good news is a lot of people don't take time to learn. The majority of the population just goes with the flow. So they have an opportunity to get ahead.
Mhm.
So, I heard that majority of people have not spent, they've spent less than 10 hours on really learning it. So they have an opportunity and leverage that and mix it with their unique gift set, whatever that is, for their career. But at a higher level, I would say at the end of the day, do what matters most to you. And they're so young, they're going to have to figure that
Yeah.
out. I'm not saying they have the answer for that, but try different things. We have the freedom and access now to really go in multiple directions. And I think it's pretty healthy in their 20s to try certain verticals. And to your point, I think we're entering a new season where they may have 5 careers,
Mm.
honestly, and it's okay. I think, if they've been prepped, like I'm excited for your daughter. If she's studying philosophy, I already know she's going to have great critical thinking skills. Now she needs to add wisdom to that, right? As she goes through life. And I just want to encourage them, look, the future may feel bleak right now as you're like applying for positions. Like a lot of college students I know have applied to like in the several hundreds to 1,000 app positions.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of those applications are being filtered by AI.
Mhm.
So, but just keep at it and know that, your end goal in life won't happen in your 20s anyway, and keep building upon the experience. But the other thing is build great relationships, like people like you and others. Tap into the network of your
Mm.
parents, of your professors, and be in each other's lives and build human relationship, because those are the ones that are going to not only lead to like recommendations and connections, but you're going to learn so much about other people if you just take the time without an agenda to learn about another human being's life. And I think that's where we get wisdom. So I would encourage them, keep at it. The future is brighter than what the media tells you it's going to be.
Perfect place to end. Thank you so much. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed the conversation. You were very kind to share what you shared. So no, I appreciate the time you've given us.
Thanks for having me.